When I asked my teacher to leave equations on the board for an extra minute, he refused and said, "If you're so special, use your phone." When I did, he banned phones in class. I didn't say a word. That was 5 months ago. Yesterday, he was packing his car, red-faced and shaking. When I was in high school, I struggled with dyslexia, but I never let it stop me from dreaming big. I knew I needed to work twice as hard just to keep up, so I set my mind on working 4 times as hard so I could reach the top. And it paid off. By senior year, I had a 3.9 GPA, was in multiple AP classes, and was laser-focused on getting into MIT. Physics was my favorite subject, but Mr. Davis, my AP physics teacher, seemed to have it out for kids like me. From the start, he made these little comments about my disability, like when I asked him to leave equations on the board for an extra minute, he refused, and told me if I'm so special and can't keep up to use a phone, so I did. But when I'd take photos of the board instead of copying, he'd tell me phones weren't allowed in class. One day I stayed after. My voice shook a little, but I laid it all out. I told him how he was violating school policy by denying me education. I told him my dyslexia didn't mean I was dumb. I thought maybe he'd understand, or at least back off, but he didn't say much, just crossed his arms and stared like I was wasting his time. I left thinking maybe I'd made it worse. Turns out I had. The next week, we were reviewing for midterms, and I asked him to clarify something on the board. He looked around the room and said, "Okay, everyone, I'm going to use smaller words and talk slower for Alex's benefit." Then he started explaining it in a dumb, slow tone, like he was talking to a toddler. He exaggerated every syllable. Every chuckled at me. My face burned so hot I felt dizzy. I tried to ask a follow-up and he said, "This is why some people should consider community college instead of aiming for MIT." Just like that, in front of everyone. I froze, couldn't move, couldn't talk. I wanted to disappear. Then I did something I didn't plan. I stood up, walked to the front of the room, shaking so hard I thought my knees would give out, and I said that dyslexia had nothing to do with intelligence, that Einstein had it, that Hawking had a disability, that I wasn't the one who should be ashamed, but he just told me to sit down and get back to the review. I wasn't sure what to expect, but what he did next, I never saw coming. He pulled me aside and said he didn't mean to hurt me, that the world wouldn't always offer accommodations. He said he was almost done writing my MIT recommendation letter, said we should move on. I didn't believe the apology, but I needed that letter. So I said okay. For a week, I was on top of the world, the happiest student alive. I had a pep in my step, until I got called to the counselor's office. She looked like she didn't even know how to start. She handed me a copy of Mr. Davis's letter, the one sent to MIT. I read it, and was horrified. It said I was admirably persistent despite cognitive challenges, but that I might struggle with independent work. He told MIT its resources were better used on other students. I didn't even feel the floor under me. She said MIT had already responded. They were passing on my application. Because of that letter, I don't remember walking home. I collapsed in my room and cried for hours, didn't eat, barely slept. I kept replaying it all, and something just broke in me, but not in a way that made me give up. It made me mad, furious. I realized if he'd done this to me, he probably did it to others too. So I got to work. I started recording everything. I got him on tape making snide remarks to a freshman with ADHD. I interviewed older students who told me he tanked their confidence. One girl said she dropped out of STEM completely after his class. I tracked grades and saw that students with IEPs consistently got lower grades in his class than anywhere else. Then I got the jackpot. I recorded him laughing about how he ignored accommodations because those kids won't succeed in real science anyway. I put everything together. Recordings, interviews, grade analysis, copies of school policies, a full timeline of what happened to me. Then I made 2 versions of the file. One went to the school board, the principal, special ed director, superintendent, and PTA heads. The other went to a local reporter who covered education. I sent them anonymously early Monday morning. By lunch, the school was in chaos. Mr. Davis got pulled from class. There was a full investigation. Parents started calling. The reporter ran a story that week, and it blew up. Suddenly, the whole community was talking about disability discrimination in schools. And me, I was laughing. But Mr. Davis, he was enraged. So enraged he became determined to take me down. And before I knew it, rumors about me started circulating. I ate my sandwich in the library, pretending to study while actually refreshing my email every 5 minutes to see if anyone had responded. The first reply came from Sarah Chen around 2:30 p.m. She wanted to talk to me, to verify some of the information I'd sent. I responded that I'd prefer to remain anonymous for now, but was willing to answer questions via email. She sent a list of follow-up questions, which I answered as thoroughly as I could. By the end of the school day, the entire faculty had been called into an emergency meeting. Students were dismissed early. As I was walking to my car, I saw Mr. Davis storming out of the building, his face red with anger. He threw his briefcase into his car so hard I thought he might break a window. I ducked behind a tree, not wanting him to see me. That night, my mom called me down to dinner with a strange look on her face. "Did you hear about Mr. Davis?" she asked casually. I tried to look surprised. "No, what about him?" "The school called all the parents of his students. Apparently there's some kind of investigation happening. They wouldn't give details, but he's on administrative leave." I nodded, focusing intently on my pasta to avoid meeting her eyes. "Weird," I said. She studied my face for a moment. "Alex, you wouldn't happen to know anything about this, would you?" I hesitated. I wasn't ready to tell her what I'd done. Not yet. I heard some rumors at school, but that's it. She didn't look convinced, but she didn't push it. My dad changed the subject to something about work, and I gratefully jumped into the new conversation. The next day at school was chaos. Everyone was talking about Mr. Davis. The substitute, Ms. Rodriguez, seemed nice, but clearly had no idea what was going on either. She just handed out worksheets and told us to work quietly. By Wednesday, Sarah Chen's first article appeared in the local paper. The headline read, "Investigation launched into alleged discrimination at Westlake High." She didn't name Mr. Davis directly, referring only to a veteran science teacher, but everyone knew who it was. The article mentioned multiple allegations of discrimination against students with learning disabilities and possible violations of federal education law. The school was in full damage control mode. The principal called an assembly to assure us that they were taking the allegations seriously and that they were committed to providing an inclusive learning environment for all students. It all sounded like PR speak to me, but at least they weren't ignoring the issue. On Thursday, I got called to the principal's office. My heart was pounding as I walked in, sure that somehow they'd figured out I was behind the leak. But Principal Warren just wanted to ask me about my experiences with Mr. Davis, as they were interviewing all of his current and former students with IEPs or 504 plans. I told her everything, the comments in class, the refusal to provide accommodations, the recommendation letter that tanked my MIT application. I didn't mention my investigation or the files I'd sent. She took notes and thanked me for my honesty, assuring me that they were taking appropriate action. By Friday, Sarah Chen had published a second, more detailed article. This one included anonymous quotes from former students describing their experiences with Mr. Davis. I recognized some of the stories from my interviews. The article also mentioned the statistical analysis, showing the grade discrepancy. The community was starting to take notice. Parents were calling the school. The school board announced a special meeting to address the situation. I should have felt victorious. My plan was working better than I could have hoped. But instead, I felt empty. MIT was still off the table. My dream was still shattered. Taking down Mr. Davis wouldn't change that. Then, on Saturday morning, I got an email from Ms. Peterson asking me to come to her office on Monday. No explanation, just a request for a meeting. I spent the entire weekend anxious, wondering if I was in trouble or if she somehow knew what I'd done. Monday morning, I dragged myself to her office, prepared for the worst. But when I walked in, she was smiling. "Alex, I have some news," she said, gesturing for me to sit. In light of recent events, I took the liberty of contacting MIT's admissions office. I explained the situation with Mr. Davis's recommendation letter and asked if they would reconsider your application. My heart started racing. And I could barely get the word out. They've agreed to review your application again, this time without Mr. Davis's letter. They're replacing it with one I wrote myself, along with a letter from Mr. Rodriguez, your AP Chem teacher. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "So, I might still have a chance?" "You definitely have a chance," she said. "A very good one, in my opinion. Your grades, test scores, and extracurriculars are all exceptional. And to be honest, I think they're a bit embarrassed about the situation. No one wants to be the university that rejected a qualified student because of discrimination." For the first time in weeks, I felt a glimmer of hope. Maybe all wasn't lost after all. But the drama with Mr. Davis was far from over. That afternoon, as I was leaving school, I saw him in the parking lot. He was cleaning out his car, throwing things into a cardboard box. He looked up and saw me watching. His eyes narrowed, and he started walking toward me. "You," he said, pointing a finger at my chest. "This is your doing, isn't it?" I took a step back. "I don't know what you're talking about. Don't play dumb with me," he hissed. "This witch hunt, these lies, you're behind it because you couldn't handle a little criticism." Students were starting to notice the confrontation. Some slowed down to watch. I felt exposed, vulnerable. "They weren't lies," I said, finding my voice. "And it wasn't criticism. It was discrimination. You violated school policy and federal law." His face contorted with rage. "You entitled little—" He cut himself off, glancing around at the growing audience. "You think you've won? This isn't over." A chill ran down my spine. It sounded like a threat. Before I could respond, Mr. Thompson appeared, putting a hand on Mr. Davis's shoulder. "James, this isn't the place," he said quietly. "Let's go back inside." Mr. Davis shook off his hand, but took a step back from me. "This isn't over," he repeated, then turned and stormed back toward the building. I stood frozen in place, my heart hammering in my chest. A few students came over to ask if I was okay. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak, and hurried to my car. That night, I told my parents everything. About the investigation, about my role in it, about Mr. Davis confronting me in the parking lot. My dad wanted to call the police, concerned about the implied threat. My mom was worried about potential backlash from the school for my methods of gathering information. I acknowledged their concerns about my recording and accessing records without permission, admitting I'd been so focused on exposing the discrimination that I hadn't fully considered the ethical implications of my actions. But ultimately, they both said they were proud of me for standing up not just for myself, but for other students as well. The next day, Sarah Chen's third article was published. This one named Mr. Davis explicitly and detailed the school's response to the allegations. According to her sources, the investigation had confirmed multiple violations of school policy and potentially of federal law. The school board was considering termination proceedings. The community reaction was mixed. Most people supported the investigation and were appalled by Mr. Davis's behavior. But he had been teaching at Westlake for over 20 years and had his defenders. Some teachers and parents thought he was being railroaded, that the accusations were exaggerated. A small but vocal group started claiming it was cancel culture at work. The debate spilled onto social media. Local Facebook groups were filled with arguments about the situation. Some people were calling for Mr. Davis to be fired immediately. Others were defending his old-school teaching methods. A few particularly nasty comments suggested that students with learning disabilities shouldn't be in AP classes anyway. I tried to stay out of it, but it was hard when the whole town was talking about something I had set in motion. My friends knew I was involved somehow. They'd seen the confrontation in the parking lot, and they knew about my history with Mr. Davis. They kept asking questions I wasn't ready to answer. Then things took an unexpected turn. Mr. Davis didn't go quietly. Instead, he went on the offensive. He gave an interview to a rival newspaper, claiming he was being persecuted for maintaining high standards and preparing students for the real world. He portrayed himself as a victim of political correctness and suggested that the real issue was entitled students and parents who couldn't handle rigorous education. Worst of all, he started spreading rumors about me. He never named me directly in his interview, but he talked about a vindictive student with a personal grudge who had orchestrated a campaign against him because of a justified poor recommendation. He implied that I had manipulated other students into making false accusations and that I had somehow tampered with grade records to make him look bad. Some people believed him. I started getting weird looks in the hallways. Someone spray-painted snitch on my locker. A few parents of other students in my AP physics class sent emails to the principal suggesting that I had exaggerated or even fabricated my claims about Mr. Davis. The stress was getting to me. My grades started slipping again. I wasn't sleeping well. Every time my phone buzzed with a notification, I dreaded looking at it, afraid it would be more drama about the situation. But I also had supporters. Ms. Peterson continued to advocate for me behind the scenes. Mr. Rodriguez publicly defended me and other students with learning disabilities. And to my surprise, Casey, the freshman with ADH, started a petition supporting the investigation and calling for better enforcement of accommodation policies. It quickly gathered hundreds of signatures from students and parents. About 3 weeks after my initial email, the school board held its special meeting to address the situation. The auditorium was packed with parents, teachers, and community members. I sat in the back with my parents, trying to be inconspicuous. The board presented the findings of their investigation, confirming most of what I had documented. They had found evidence of a pattern of discrimination against students with learning disabilities, violations of accommodation requirements, and inappropriate comments in class and in recommendation letters. They announced that Mr. Davis had been placed on indefinite administrative leave while they determined appropriate next steps. Then they opened the floor for public comments. I wasn't prepared for what came next. One by one, students stood up and shared their experiences with Mr. Davis, not just the ones I had interviewed, but others I hadn't even known about. A girl with anxiety disorder who had been mocked for having panic attacks during tests. A boy with auditory processing issues who had been accused of not paying attention when he was actually struggling to understand spoken instructions. Parents of former students who had watched their children's confidence and love of science evaporate under Mr. Davis's teaching. It went on for over an hour. Story after story, all painting the same picture of a teacher who had abused his position of authority to bully and discriminate against vulnerable students. By the end, there were few dry eyes in the room. Mr. Davis wasn't present. He had declined to attend on advice from his lawyer, but his few remaining defenders in the audience looked increasingly uncomfortable as the testimonies continued. The board thanked everyone for their input and announced they would make a final decision within the week. As the meeting adjourned, people started coming up to me. They had figured out my role in the investigation, either from rumors or just by connecting the dots. But instead of the anger or accusation I had feared, they were thanking me, shaking my hand, telling me I had done the right thing. I was overwhelmed. This had started as a personal vendetta, a way to get back at the teacher who had destroyed my dream. But it had become something much bigger. I had given a voice to students who had been silenced for years. I had exposed a problem that went beyond one bad teacher to a system that had failed to protect its most vulnerable students. The next day, I received an email from MIT. They had reconsidered my application and wanted to schedule an interview. It wasn't an acceptance, not yet, but it was a second chance I never thought I'd get. As I walked through the school hallways that day, I felt different, lighter somehow, despite all the drama still swirling around. I had stood up against injustice and made a real difference. Whatever happened with MIT, whatever Mr. Davis and his supporters might say about me, I knew I had done the right thing. But Mr. Davis wasn't going down without a fight, and he was about to escalate things in ways I never could have anticipated. The rumors started small, just whispers at first. Someone heard from someone else that I had cheated on tests in Mr. Davis's class, that I was only mad about the recommendation because I knew I didn't deserve to get into MIT, that I had manipulated other students into lying about their experiences. I tried to ignore it. I focused on preparing for my MIT interview, scheduled for the following week. Ms. Peterson was helping me practice, asking tough questions, and giving me feedback on my responses. I was starting to feel cautiously optimistic again. Then the rumors got worse. Much worse. I can't even repeat them here because they were so nasty and personal. Let's just say they questioned my character in ways that went far beyond academic integrity. And they were spreading fast, not just at school, but throughout the community. I was getting really stressed out by all these rumors. Like, I couldn't even focus on my MIT interview prep because I was constantly checking my phone to see what new horrible thing people were saying about me. My parents wanted me to just delete all my social media, but that felt like letting Mr. Davis win somehow. The worst part was when these rumors started affecting my friends. Jake, who'd been my lab partner in chemistry since sophomore year, texted me one night asking if any of the stuff was true. I was so mad I almost threw my phone across the room. Like, he'd known me for 3 years, and he was actually wondering if I was the person these rumors made me out to be. I told him he should know better, and he apologized, but things were weird between us after that. My MIT interview was scheduled for Thursday afternoon. I was supposed to video chat with an alumni interviewer named Dr. Patel. I'd been practicing answers with Ms. Peterson all week, but by Thursday morning I was a nervous wreck. Not just about the interview, but about everything. The rumors had gotten so bad that some parents were calling for me to be investigated now, like I was the problem, not the teacher who'd been discriminating against students for decades. I almost canceled the interview. I seriously sat there with my finger hovering over the email button, thinking maybe I should just give up. But then I remembered all those students at the school board meeting, sharing their stories because I'd given them the courage to speak up. I couldn't bail now, so I put on my nicest shirt, fixed my hair, and set up my laptop in the dining room where the lighting was good. My hands were shaking so bad I could barely type in the video chat link. Dr. Patel was actually really cool. She was an MIT grad who now worked at some tech company, and she started by telling me she'd read about the situation with Mr. Davis in the local paper. My stomach dropped. I thought for sure she was about to tell me MIT didn't want students who caused trouble. Instead, she said, "It takes real courage to stand up to authority figures when they're abusing their power. That's the kind of integrity we value at MIT." I almost started crying right there. The interview went great after that. We talked about physics, my projects, my goals for the future. She seemed genuinely impressed with my knowledge, and she didn't ask a single question about my dyslexia or accommodations. She treated me like any other applicant, which was all I'd ever wanted. After the interview, I felt better than I had in weeks, but that feeling didn't last long. When I checked my phone, I had like 20 messages from friends warning me not to go on Facebook. Obviously, that made me immediately go on Facebook. Mr. Davis had created a public post about me. He didn't use my name, but it was obviously about me. He wrote this long thing about how certain students were manipulating the system, how accommodations were being abused, and how he was being persecuted for maintaining standards. The worst part was seeing how many people had liked and shared it, including parents of kids at my school and even a couple of teachers. I showed my parents, and my dad immediately called the principal. He was furious that a teacher was basically cyberbullying a student. The principal promised to address it, but the damage was already done. The post had been shared hundreds of times. The next day at school was a nightmare. People were openly talking about me in the hallways. Some kids from the baseball team, who were always Mr. Davis's favorites, bumped into me between classes and knocked my books out of my hands. When I bent down to pick them up, one of them said, "Need extra time for that too, retard?" I lost it. I stood up and shoved him hard, which was probably the dumbest thing I could have done. He was twice my size and on the baseball team. He shoved me back, and I went flying into the lockers. A crowd started gathering, chanting, "Fight! Fight!" like this was some kind of entertainment. Before things could get worse, Mr. Rodriguez appeared out of nowhere. He got between us and broke it up, sending the baseball guys to the principal's office and taking me to the nurse to check out the cut on my head from hitting the lockers. While the nurse was cleaning me up, Mr. Rodriguez sat next to me and asked what happened. I told him everything, not just about the fight, but about the rumors, the Facebook post, all of it. He listened without interrupting, then said something that really stuck with me. "You know what the hardest part of standing up for what's right is? It's not the initial decision to act. It's continuing to stand when everyone is trying to knock you down." After the nurse cleared me, Mr. Rodriguez walked me to my next class. On the way, he told me he'd been in touch with Sarah Chen, the reporter. She was working on a follow-up story about how Mr. Davis was retaliating against students who spoke out. He asked if I'd be willing to go on the record this time. I hesitated. Going public would make me an even bigger target, but staying anonymous clearly wasn't protecting me anymore. "I'll think about it," I told him. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about what Mr. Rodriguez had said about continuing to stand. I thought about all the other students with learning disabilities who might come after me, who might have to deal with teachers like Mr. Davis. I thought about how I'd feel if I backed down now, after coming this far. By morning, I'd made my decision. I emailed Sarah Chen and told her I was ready to tell my story, my full story, with my name attached. We met at a coffee shop off campus after school. I brought all my evidence, recordings, emails, the recommendation letter, everything. I walked her through the whole timeline, from the first day in Mr. Davis's class, to the confrontation in the parking lot, to the rumors and the Facebook post. She took detailed notes and recorded our conversation. She asked tough questions, making sure she had all the facts straight. When we were done, she thanked me for my courage and promised the article would run in Sunday's paper. I spent the weekend in a state of total anxiety. My parents were supportive, but worried about the backlash. They suggested maybe I should stay home from school on Monday, but that felt like hiding. I was done hiding. Sunday morning, I woke up early and grabbed the paper from the driveway before anyone else was up. Sarah's article was on the front page of the local section. The headline read, "Student Speaks Out, the real story behind Westlake High discrimination case." The article was comprehensive. It detailed my experience with Mr. Davis, the MIT recommendation, and my investigation. It included quotes from other students and from education experts about the importance of accommodations. It also covered Mr. Davis's retaliation campaign and the cyberbullying I'd experienced. Most importantly, it included a statement from the superintendent announcing that Mr. Davis had been officially terminated for violations of school policy, educational law, and ethical standards. The school board had voted unanimously after reviewing all the evidence. I felt this weird mix of emotions reading it. Relief that it was finally over, pride that I'd stood my ground, sadness for all the students who'd suffered under Mr. Davis before me, and honestly, a little fear about what Monday would bring. Monday morning, I walked into school with my head held high, trying to project confidence I didn't really feel. The first person I saw was Casey, the freshman with ADH. They were standing by my locker with a small group of students. When they saw me, they started clapping. Actually clapping, right there in the hallway. More students joined in, then some teachers. Even Principal Warren, who was passing by, stopped and applauded. I was so embarrassed I wanted to disappear, but also kind of amazed. These people had read my story, and they were on my side. Casey gave me a fist bump and said, "You're a legend, man." The rest of the day was surreal. People I barely knew came up to thank me. Teachers made a point of checking if I needed any accommodations in their classes. Even some of the kids who'd been spreading rumors apologized, saying they hadn't known the whole story. Not everyone was supportive, of course. The baseball guys still glared at me in the hallway. A few parents who were friends with Mr. Davis made comments on the newspaper's website about how I'd ruined a good man's career, but they were the minority now. After school, Ms. Peterson called me into her office. She had news from MIT. I held my breath, preparing for either outcome. "They've accepted you," she said, breaking into a huge smile. Full scholarship. I couldn't believe it. After everything, I was going to MIT after all. I hugged Ms. Peterson so hard I nearly knocked her over, then ran to tell my parents. They were ecstatic. My mom cried. My dad kept saying how proud he was. We went out for pizza to celebrate, and for the first time in months, I felt like everything was going to be okay. The last few weeks of senior year were actually pretty awesome. The school implemented new training for teachers about accommodations and learning disabilities. They hired a consultant to review all their policies, and they asked me to help, to give the student perspective. It felt good to be turning a negative experience into positive change. Graduation day was perfect. When they called my name to get my diploma, the applause was so loud it was almost embarrassing. Principal Warren shook my hand and whispered, "MIT is lucky to have you." As I was leaving the ceremony, a woman I didn't recognize approached me. She introduced herself as Mr. Davis's wife. My stomach dropped. I was sure she was about to yell at me or something. Instead, she handed me an envelope. "James asked me to give you this," she said quietly. I opened it later, alone in my room. It was a letter from Mr. Davis. It wasn't an apology, not really. He still maintained that his teaching methods were appropriate and that accommodations were often overused. He expressed no real remorse for what he'd done to me or the other students. Instead, he wrote about how he felt betrayed by the school system and how his decades of service had been forgotten. He ended by saying he hoped I'd learn that the real world wouldn't be as forgiving as the education system. His letter confirmed what I'd suspected all along. He genuinely believed he was right to discriminate against students with learning disabilities. He hadn't learned anything from this experience except perhaps that he should have been more careful about expressing his views openly. I decided not to respond. Some chapters are better left closed. That summer flew by. I worked at the local science center, helping with their programs for kids with learning disabilities. I got to design hands-on physics experiments that worked for different learning styles. It was the perfect preparation for MIT. Moving to Cambridge was intimidating. The campus was huge, the classes were challenging, and everyone seemed so smart. But on my first day of Physics 101, the professor announced that anyone with accommodations should feel free to speak with him privately. When I did, he didn't question me or make me justify my needs. He just said, "No problem. We'll make sure you have what you need to succeed." That's when I knew I was exactly where I belonged. I still have dyslexia. I still have to work harder than most people to process written information. But now I know that doesn't make me any less capable or deserving of opportunities. And I know that standing up for yourself and others is always worth it, even when it's hard, especially when it's hard. Sometimes I think about Mr. Davis and wonder if he really understood the impact of what he did. I'll never know for sure, but I do know that because of what happened, the school is a better place for students with learning disabilities, and I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be, studying physics at my dream school, proving him wrong every single day. I've been at MIT for almost a year now. It's tough, but I'm doing well. Turns out working 4 times as hard as everyone else for years was pretty good preparation for one of the most challenging universities in the world. And whenever things get difficult, I remember what I learned from that whole experience with Mr. Davis, that I'm stronger than I thought, that I can overcome obstacles most people never face, and that sometimes fighting for what's right changes more than just your own life.